Well, guys, I'm starting from a different place today so that you can have a little bit better sound. I heard from some of you that the sound was a little bit dicey last week, so we're trying a different place. In the reflections, let me know if this is better sound. And let's share where we're at. We have a lot to do today, and this is kind of a fun class, isn't it? I know many of you were a little intimidated by this class because it's very different, right? But also kind of cool. So, hey, we've made it through module 2, which means that you are a significant way through the class in these 6-week classes, right? Remember, you're doing about 3 weeks of work in every week. So, hey, you've actually done 3 weeks of work if you finished everything. Just so that you know, the gradings for everything from last week should be done by Wednesday. So you can find your grades by going over here in the grade things to finding your grades, my grades. So you can click on my grades and see them. Sometimes some of the things won't have comments. Some of the smaller things that don't really need comments on them will just have grades. The bigger ones, you should find some more specific and in-depth comments to them so you can see what you did and why. I know this is really intimidating because you don't know how I grade, right? You're trying to figure that out in a 6-week course, and you're trying to figure out, like, what is it that she's looking for? So again, keep in mind that lots of these bigger, more in-depth things do have rubrics, and I want you to look through the rubrics before you turn things in to catch some of your own mistakes, right? So here's our overview for Module 2 and the assignment order. Again, it does ask you to usually I think your first assignment is due by Thursday in the discussion board posting, and then most of the other things are due by Sunday. But I highly recommend, again, getting those things done faster. Listen to the reflection today, get it done right away while it's fresh in your mind, right at the beginning of the week. Then you're doing the reading, then you're doing the discussion board, and then Friday or Saturday, get the discussion board post to your peers done so that that's still fresh in your mind. You have a chance to see some of the things that they're posting. They have a chance to see yours and comment on them. That gives you a little bit of time to think, am I doing this right? I can compare myself. Are they doing it right? And then you have time to revise things and turn it in before Sunday. So this is what we're doing this week. We're going to study plot, characterization, setting, symbolism, and figurative language, and theme. And those are very different things to look at than a composition class where you might be analyzing a particular subject, right? Here you are actually analyzing a story and some of the components of a story. So we'll talk through some of that in a little bit. The stories you're reading this week are The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin, very famous story. Sunny's Blues by James Baldwin. One of my favorite authors is James Baldwin. I didn't choose these. This class is put together by Indiana Tech, and everybody that teaches it teaches exactly the same thing. So I didn't choose these, but I'm very pleased by them. And The Wall of Fire Rising, which by Edwidge Danicat. That's a new one to me. And I'd Love You to Want Me by Nugent. Now you can see that we have a large variety of diversity here. We have females, we have a Black author, we have we have a wide variety of stuff, which is really cool. So that gives you some various things to think about. One of the greatest things about literature is helping us step out of our own shoes and into somebody else's shoes and hear what's in their heads, right? So this gives you the opportunity to do that. And then don't forget you have a short story analysis, and that's what we'll be talking through today too. Okay, so let's get rid of that and move into the next thing that we have here. We have learning resources. Always there's going to be in every module, so there's going to be learning resources, one section, and assessments due in another. And in this particular one, you can see in your literature book, you can see all the reading assignments here. Notice that the plot, characterization, setting, symbolism, theme things are first. So you want to read those things first before you read the second set, which are all of the short stories. And that is, again, so that as you're reading the short stories, you can kind of look for these particular elements of the story. Although you may want to do it the way I do it, and that's if you have time to read the short stories twice, which I highly recommend, at least twice. I sometimes will read the short stories first, just because I want to enjoy them, right? I don't want to really think about them. I just want to read them to enjoy them. And then I go back and read this stuff up here, plot, characters, right? So I understand the components of it. And then I go back and read the short stories again. And this time I'm paying attention for the short stories. What's the plot? What's the characterization? What's the setting? This way, so the first time I can just enjoy them for the stories. The second time I'm kind of analyzing them. And that might work for you. If it works for you, you might want to try doing that. Reading the things to enjoy it maybe on Sunday, and then thinking through the meaning of them and the components of them, and then reading them again later in the week. So keep that in mind. Notice there is a folder here on the bottom for MLA formatting stuff. When you get to the short story or the story analysis, you want to go back and remind yourself of the MLA things. We usually send you to the OWL Online Writing Lab for Purdue for those things. It's very extensive, and you can look up anything you need to do for that. Now, let's dive into the Module 2 lesson. If you were to open up the lesson, you would find here, this is a lesson overview. And these are things that you may want to take a look at before you do the reading. They help you kind of to focus on specific parts and pieces of those various components that you're looking at. What we call literary devices of short stories, plot, characterization, setting, symbolism and figurative language, and theme. And these are not things that people necessarily, like you go to a movie, you don't necessarily think, oh, what was the theme of the movie? Especially the first time through when you're just enjoying it, right? You go and you listen to it, you enjoy it, then you kind of start thinking about the way it worked, right? Or didn't work. Plot, and they have here, a German playwright put this together. There are 7 key steps in successful storytelling. And so if a story didn't work for you, and some of these short stories you may not like, right? Just because they've been published and out there doesn't mean you're going to like them all. Some of them you'll like better than others. Some of you will disagree on which ones you like the best, right? That's what short stories are about, to give you a variety of things to think about. Some of the things that I didn't like in my 20s, I do like now. And the other way around. Some of the things I loved in my 20s or 30s, I don't like now, right? Some of that short story stuff is kind of speaking to where we are. So, you might all be different ages, different experiences, different things in life. And depending on where you're at in life, you may like or not like your particular story too. But here's how it works or doesn't work. So pay attention to these 7 different pieces. And again, the first time you read something, read it to enjoy it or watch it to enjoy it. This second time is when you want to start thinking about this. So we have what we call the exposition at the beginning, sets the stage. We have some sort of inciting incident that happens. Sometimes it happens right on the very first page where suddenly, something bad happens and it's the inciting incident. Sometimes it happens further on in the short story or the paper or the essay or the book. Then we have what we call the rising action. Now, you can see that this is a really evenly spaced triangle, right? Every story is going to be different. Some of them you're going to have the rising action that goes way over here, and then the end is really quick. Some of them, the rising action starts over here and goes really fast. This is just a way in which you can help to visualize it in your head. So rising action, there's always some sort of complication, right? Oh, things are going well, they figured it out. Oh no, that's not what happened here. We suddenly, you had a car wreck or something happened to complicate things, right? If it were all easy and pretty and happy, there'd be no story, right? Then there's what we call the climax. The climax of the story, the moment at which things are on this precipice here. We can fall on one side or fall on the other, but we know that that's the point. Sometimes then there's a reversal. Sometimes that's a character that changes their opinion, changes their mind. Sometimes, it's rags to riches. We've got somebody who's poor who wins the lottery. That's a reversal. Whatever the case may be, sometimes there's some sort of reversal. And then the action starts to fall toward the conclusion, right? And you kind of get that feel too. It's starting to wrap up. There's a resolution and a denouement. That's a French word that means like the conclusion, the wrap up, right? The way things end. Okay, so this is just a cute little version of being able to visualize a story. Sometimes students will take and make this little mark and then write to themselves how it worked. That's helpful in analyzing a story. In the story of an hour, what was the exposition? What was the inciting incident? There's a rainstorm. Then what happened? Who was where? How did that work? Right? So this is just a way to do that. Now, another part of a short story is the setting. So, for instance, the story of an hour was set in a particular place, right? A particular moment, a thing happened, a setting happened. Could the story have happened in another place? Probably not, right? There is a specific setting in which it could happen. Sometimes you might see a setting that's a desert. Sometimes you might see a rainforest. And there's a different feel, right? So sometimes stories can be set anywhere. Sometimes the setting is extremely important to where and how the story falls. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about or analyzing your short story. Does the setting matter? How much does the setting matter? Because it always matters, but how much does it matter? For instance, is it a time period? Is it after a war? Is there civil unrest? Does that time period influence the action, influence the characters to do a particular thing? Is it in the springtime? Is it in the winter time? Those matter sometimes to our feeling about specific things, right? Right, so are there names of streets or neighborhoods or descriptions? Is it dark? Is it light? Is it, those in a short story particularly, every piece, every choice that an author makes matters to how things fall, right? Every little piece is chosen very carefully. So we have great picture here. I really like this picture. It looks like it's probably in Italy, and it's in a book, right? It's like we open it up and we can imagine being there. Okay, literary devices, characterization, symbols, figurative language. English majors like myself love these kinds of things. Not everybody else does, right? But we want to do a thoughtful analysis of these particular characters who do appear in these short stories, right? We want to ask ourselves about, first of all, is our character static or dynamic? Okay, so a static character stays the same throughout the whole thing. A dynamic character changes, and it might be because they were good and they will go bad, or they were bad and they go good, or it might be just that they've changed their mind about a specific thing. It might be that they have gone from poor to rich. It might be any particular change, but those make a difference whether they're static or dynamic, right? How do they change? Why do they change? What impacted them to change? If they don't change, why is it that they don't change? Are they stubborn? Are they boring? Are they just there for filler? What is it about the understanding of the world that makes this character do what they do? Okay, right? Another thing we're considering are symbols, right? So in a short story, these symbols matter more than others. So sometimes you might see something like the example they give you, a caged bird. A caged bird might represent some sort of lack of freedom, like they're caged, they can't go anywhere. And then that might be part of an argument for, should we let the bird go free? Well, maybe it's been in captivity its entire life and it wouldn't know how to be free. Or, so there's some sort of argument perhaps to make with a literary symbol. Keep an eye out for literary symbols and also things such as similes and metaphors. Similes are comparisons to something. The grass is as green as a sapphire. Sapphire is as green as grass, to help us visualize something. And so sometimes when you see similes and metaphors within a short story, they're trying to convey a specific meaning or picture to you as a reader. Okay? The hardest thing, I think, for people to find when they're looking about short stories is a theme. Right? What's the theme of the story? And one of the ways to think about this, again, to think about the plot, think about how the story works, think about the setting, where is the time, where is the place, think about the characterization about, is a character static or dynamic. Think about the symbols. These things help you to see, is there a bird, is there a color, is there something that keeps popping up that remind you of something? And then a theme. So let's say a short story might be about renewal, somebody who's renewing themselves. So maybe the time period of the year is important, right? Spring, growth, winter, death, right? So that might be important too. Um, there might be some other thing happening that helps you with the theme. Oftentimes, if you're not sure about it, the internet is a wonderful place where you can look up themes of various short stories. But don't do that before you read it. Really read the short story and think about it yourself. You're going to get a whole lot more out of it if you're thinking about it yourself first before looking up what somebody else thinks, right? Okay, so one of the things you can do here to analyze a short story is this activity. And this kind of will help you to think through various parts of things. This is just you might want to print this out and then use it to kind of talk your way through various parts of it to analyze the short story before you write it. So this is a great little schematic to do that. And again, here's next steps. Okay, so that kind of walks you through that. I'm not going to walk through everything there because that's provided for you within the module. But I do want to show you a couple of quick videos that kind of give you more visualizations of what we're talking about. So this is a quick video that kind of talks you through the elements of a story in a rather entertaining way. This might be helpful to you. So here we go.
Let's talk about the elements of a story. Character, setting, plot, and theme. Most stories and movies follow a similar pattern. The patterns or elements are not always easy to see, and sometimes the author hides them to make us think, search for them, or use our imaginations. Good readers can follow this pattern and talk about it with the right terms. Also, learning the elements of a story will not only help you read better, but it can also help you write your own creative stories. This is the 6th video in the series, Foundations of Reading Comprehension. The goal is to help you become an active participant in the reading process. I'm not only going to explain each element of a story, but give you examples from the book The Digger and The Duckling. So if you haven't already, you can listen to this read aloud. First, let's talk about the plot. The plot is the big moments or events of the story. This is how the story develops and unfolds. When the plot is exciting, readers are on the edge of their seats, dying to know what happens next. The plot is made up of 6 parts. Get ready for some big words. First, the exposition. This is where we meet the characters and get to know the setting. The characters are the who, the people, or animals in the story. We see the story through the eyes of the characters, and they're the ones that drive the story forward. Good authors create characters that we like and relate to. For example, in our book, The Digger and the Duckling, the characters are the duckling, digger, and all the other trucks. Each character has traits and their own personality. This is what the character is like. Sometimes the author tells us what the character is like, and other times we have to infer. I'll cover that in a future video. We know the digger is nice. Does it ever say he's nice? No, it doesn't. But we see that he's nice because he helps the duckling. We get to know the characters by what they do and say in the story. Next, the setting is also introduced in the exposition. This is the when and where that the story takes place. The setting will change throughout the story as the characters go on their journey, but great settings are places where readers love to go and can imagine living there. The Digger and the Duckling takes place on a construction site. That is the location, the where. It happens over several seasons. We see it go from spring to summer, to fall to winter, and then back to spring. That is the when or time of the story. It shows us the story takes place over a period of time. The next part of the plot is the problem. This is a challenge or obstacle that the characters will have to fix and overcome in the story. This is the why. The characters go on a journey. Why? To fix the problem. There can be both internal and external problems. Internal problems happen inside the character. Maybe they lack confidence, are not happy, or they feel alone. These are the problems the character faces in their head. In our story, the internal problem is the anger or frustration that the trucks feel. Throughout the story, you can see them battling their emotions, and they finally overcome it when they've learned to become family. External problems are challenges the character faces in the world. It could be a big bully or an evil villain. For example, in our story, there's a couple external problems. First, the duckling is lost. It doesn't know where its family is. Second, the duckling needs someone to take care of her. And lastly, the duckling bothers the other trucks by making a huge mess. Great stories will have both types of problems. And sometimes in the story, the problem gets worse before it gets better. Just know that the whole point of the story is for the characters to solve the problem. The third part of the plot is a rising action. This is the longest part of the story, and it's where the characters try to solve the problem. They may make mistakes, or even make the problem worse at times, but we will slowly see our characters grow and change through the story. In our story, the rising action is a part where each truck slowly begins to like and care for the duck. We watch as one by one they grow to like the duckling, and the duckling learns to help them. Real quick, before we move on, if you found any value so far in the video, smash the like button so this video can spread and help more people. This is the 6th video in the series, Foundations of Reading Comprehension. At the end of this video, I'm going to give you a challenge to practice this skill. Now the fourth part is the climax. This is the most intense part of the story. The problem has gotten worse and it seems impossible to fix. You're on the edge of your seat, dying to know what comes next. This happens closer to the end of the story. The climax of our story is when the wind carries the duck away and the trucks are worried that she's gonna get hurt. You see how the trucks have gone from being angry to wanting to save the duck. Next, the falling action. This is where the story slows down. The problem has been solved and the characters are moving on. In our story, right before the duckling falls, she spreads her wings and flies. The trucks realize she's all grown up and encourage her to spread her wings and fly away. The duck leaves and the trucks go back to building. There's a sense of pride, but also sadness. The final part of the plot is the resolution. This is where the character reflects on what they've learned, and the author answers any questions we still have. The book ends with the duck returning. You realize the duck sees the trucks as their family and the job site as her home. You get to enjoy the change in the characters and reflect on the lessons of family. There's another duck in the pond, so you start to wonder, will there be a second book? The main thing you need to know is that good stories send the characters on exciting journeys to fix the major problem. The last element of a story is theme. This is a message, lesson, or moral of the story. The author never directly tells us what the theme is, so we do some detective work to figure it out. Think about these questions. What did the character learn? How did the character change and grow? What message or lesson is the author trying to teach me? The trucks learn to live as family and welcome in someone who was lost. It can teach us to do the same thing in our lives. Now, here's the challenge. I want you to find a book that you enjoy reading. It's better if you know the story really well. I have created a document for you that you'll find in the video description. You can either print this out and write your ideas down, or just talk about your answers. These questions.
Okay, so you can see that that kind of does a little bit of the same thing that we talked about. I will provide this video for you in case you want to see it again. But at this point, I want to spend a little bit of time looking at the activities that we have to do, right? So let's talk through what you have to do, first of all. So the first thing you're going to be doing is this discussion board, as always. And that initial response is due first by Thursday. So you're going to read the 4 short stories. Again, I recommend reading them more than once so that you have a real good feel for them and understanding what is in them. And then you're going to answer these questions for all 4 of them. Describe the plot, describe the setting, describe the main character. Are they dynamic? Are they static, like we talked about? And how and why did you come to that conclusion? What symbols or figurative language you see. And again, you're going to do them for all 4. And you're going to see different answers and things in your peers, right? They're going to pick up on different things than you pick up on. And partly that's why we do this discussion board, so that you can kind of see what are other people seeing. And remember that some of these things you're going to pick up on are going to be different because of your own experiences. So reading other people's experiences and thinking their thoughts on it is really going to help enlighten you to the story. So what makes a really good short story is that every time you read it, you come up with something different, something more, right? That's what makes a really good short story. Something that's not as good, maybe you read it once and you're done and you never want to see it again, right? Now, again, for your responses, it says they're due by Sunday, but please do them by Thursday or Friday or Saturday so that you can get a feel for the other points. This will also help you with writing the short story response much better than if you're waiting until Sunday when it's already due. Okay, so let's take a look at that short story analysis paper. What are you going to do with it? You're going to pick one of the short story, one, not all 4, yay, right? You're going to argue for a specific interpretation or theme. Now, you're not going to have the same responses as somebody else, and that's okay. As long as you can support your thoughts from the short story that you choose, you're good. So you're going to pick one that analyzes, like, let's start with this. An introduction with a thesis that argues a particular meaning or interpretation. Theses often start like this. Do they have to? No, but they often do. The short story, let's say you pick Wall of Rising by Edwidge Danicat, demonstrates that, or demonstrates how, blah, 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 right? Figure it out. You can change that. You can change the short story to any of the four. You can change the thesis by any of the four, but this gives you a good beginning for how you want to start it. You want to have a paragraph that analyzes the plot. What's the main conflict happening here? What are the resolution or resolutions that happen? Or maybe there's a lack of resolution. That's a big problem. And how does this connect back to whatever you just said demonstrates that or demonstrates how? How does that connect? Another paragraph about the characterizations. Again, you're talking through the main characters and you're quoting your story, right? So you're going to have read this, whatever short story you've picked here. You're going to have to read it a couple of times. You're probably going to highlight some quotes that you're going to use. What are you going to use? We need examples. So for example, then quote the story, right? We want to see some quotes and examples within there. So are your characters static? Are they dynamic? How do you know? Well, if you say it's static, then maybe give a quote. If you say it's dynamic, give a quote that explains what this is. So look very carefully for those when you're reading it on the second or third time. And again, how does that connect to your thesis or your main argument or interpretation? That's important. Another paragraph that analyzes the settings, right? How does the setting, does it matter? Sometimes they matter much more than others. Does it have to be in the setting for the story to have happened? The story of an hour, there's a rainstorm that's really important to what happens, right? Why is that important? Could the story have happened in another place? Well, you can make an argument for it, but like you need to discuss that and think about how that would work. A paragraph that analyzes any symbols or figurative language. Again, keep always this part here. Always bring it back to your thesis or interpretation and show how it matters, right? This is important for you to think through. So make sure that your thesis statement is very carefully thought through and that you can use all these to prove what you're trying to say. Finally, a conclusion that brings it all together, right? What's the significance and worth of this character's life, of their lives, of what happened, of what didn't happen, right? Make sure to read a section on thesis statements very closely and utilize the vocabulary that is in there before you start writing that thesis. Very important. Ding, 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 right? Warning. As you write, remember to analyze. We don't want just a summary of the story. We've read the story. You're going to be doing an analysis of it. What do you think happened here? What does it mean? And using examples to say, well, I thought I meant this. This is why. Here's an example, right? This story should be in MLA format. As we've discussed before, make sure you include multiple quotes from the story itself. And then again, look at this rubric very carefully before you write it and then before you turn it in. So look at the rubric twice. Look at it at the beginning so you know what you're doing. After you write it, then look back at it and think, okay, did I do all these things? If I didn't, I need to remedy that before I turn it in. Okay? And of course, the live reflection, which let's move that up because you really should do that first, right? Actually, I think you should do it before anything else. So do the live reflection after you've listened to this, then do the discussion board, and then do the story. That's kind of how I would do it if I were you. Get rid of that. All right, now we've got a couple of short story parts that I want you to listen to. So we're going to start with the story of an hour. And this might help you. And in fact, if you haven't read the short story, you may want to pause at this moment and go read it yourself first. And that gives you the opportunity to encounter it and think about it yourself first and have your own thoughts, and then come back and listen to this particular one. I will provide all of these links in an announcement in case you want to go back and look at them yourself. But here is somebody else's thoughts of the story of an hour. Again, make sure you've read it first before you listen to this.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Valcarcel. Let's take a look at The Story of an Hour, a short story by Kate Chopin. And as we walk through the story, let's ask ourselves two questions. Is this woman happy in her marriage? Is it a good marriage? And secondly, from what does she actually die at the end? The doctor gives us one cause, but I think the doctor has got it all wrong. So the first sentence tells us that Mrs. Mallard is afflicted with heart trouble. So she has a heart condition, and indeed, a heart attack is what kills her at the end on the literal level. So we find out she has heart trouble at the very beginning. Because of this heart trouble, great care is taken to break the news gently. Hey, your husband has died in a train accident. Her sister is very delicate and, tiptoeing around the news before really telling her, yes, he's died. Now, the first reaction that Mrs. Mallard has is to weep with wild abandon, it says. She wept at once with sudden, wild abandonment. That tells me that she truly is sad that her husband is gone, that the life that she's known up to now is drastically changing, is gone. Her sister hugs her. There seems to be genuine sadness here. So that tells me that this marriage was not abusive, not horribly bad, and not untypically bad. It says that when the grief had spent itself, Mrs. Mallard went up to her room. And here is where we see her going through a series of emotional changes. At first, she's kind of hollowed out and empty, and then she's in a stupor, sort of. It says that her eyes had a dull stare. At the same time, though, she is sitting in front of an open window, and symbolically, this is important because things are now opening to her. Her life is about to open up, and her mind is about to open into some new ideas. Now that her husband is gone, there's some potentials and possibilities that creep into her mind. As she sits in front of the open window, she hears birds, she sees patches of blue sky breaking through clouds, a lot of positive imagery that shows that life goes on, that life is sweet, and pretty soon she's going to feel that life is sweet too, even though just recently she's been worrying that life would be long and feeling that that would be a burden. Then Kate Chopin writes, there was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it, fearfully. What was it? She did not know. So a new feeling is coming to her just out of this grief process. She is not immediately feeling happiness, but she's about to. It says that she was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching. It says, when she abandoned herself, a little whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. She said it over and over under her breath, free, free, free. For the first time, she realizes that one of the outcomes of her husband's death is that she will now live for herself instead of living for him. She will not be repressed, even in those subtle ways that can happen in a relationship, especially in a patriarchal culture where a husband does have more authority than the woman, is granted more power, more legal status than women. This is a time period when women couldn't even own property in the state where Kate Chopin lived. Now, does this mean that she was not happily married? Well, it does say that her husband always looked on her with love. She says the face that had never looked save with love upon her. So she recognizes that he's trying to be a good husband, but he can't help but impose his will upon her. It says there would be no powerful will bending hers. And that is what she is relieved of now, that now she doesn't have to worry about what he thinks about everything. She doesn't have to obey everything that he wants to do. She has freedom. And this is kind of a surprise to her, but the more she thinks about it, the more she enjoys it. She says, free, body and soul, free. She's out from under someone else's authority. Even if it was a kind or loving authority, still, she is now free. Now, all this time, Josephine's been knocking on the door, the sister, saying, "Are you okay? Are you making yourself ill?" And Mrs. Mallard says, "No, I'm fine." And when she emerges from the room, it says that she descends the stairs like the goddess of victory. She has self-possession, something she has not been able to have before. And that is so valuable to her that she looks forward to long life. She's happy. But of course, the surprise ending is that her husband comes in the door, not even knowing that there had been an accident. He wasn't even on that train, and she dies. Now, the doctor says they came and said she had died of heart disease, of the joy that kills. Obviously, the doctor assumes that she's so happy to see her husband that her heart could not withstand such joy. We know better that while the marriage was functional and not horribly cruel, she still appreciated this newfound freedom that she had when she thought her husband was gone. And she actually dies not only of literally a heart attack, but the snatching of that freedom away, the realization that she will have to go back into a subservient role, into a repressed situation, that she will not live for just herself, but she will have to bend her will to someone else. And this robbing of the freedom is what really kills her. All right. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this little look at the story of an hour. And
Okay, so I really hope that you did take my advice and didn't get a spoiler there at the end. So hopefully you've read it and now you've listened to this. Now, this is not the only interpretation of this, and you might disagree with this one. And that would be okay if you have some other things from the story that you saw instead. This is just one interpretation of it. If you agree with it, then when you're reading through it, you can look for themes. You can look for the theme. You can look for the characters. Are they static? Are they, is the husband, does he change at all? Does he stay the same? Well, we only see him for a little bit. Does she change? Does she see things that make her want to change because of what's happened to her? Did the train wreck? Does it matter? All these things you can ask yourself. Do you see things that help with the thematic thing of freedom? As you're reading through the story. So you may want to, again, read it again and start thinking through that stuff and see the things that the author chooses to place in the rooms or place outside or place in a window. Do those things matter to that theme? Okay. All right. The second one that you read is, again, one of my favorite authors. And this is called Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin. Really famous guy. This is him over here on the left. You can see a picture of him. James Baldwin was very famous. And let's take a look at this particular short story.
This story was an absolute doozy, with the themes of suffering, light and darkness, call and response. We've got a lot to talk about today, Mr. Crypto.
Oh, so much. Can we do 2 videos on this one, please? I need 2 videos.
If you are new to the Codex Cantina, we tackle some of the most important literature that has influenced even today's writers. If you're down for a conversational approach to literature, please hit that subscribe button to join us.
And as always, we start off publication information. Sonny's Blues, written by James Baldwin, was originally published in 1957. And we'll leave a link down in the description where you can listen for free.
To me, the title of this story kind of has 2 meanings, because we have Sonny's Blues, as in Sonny is sad, he's got the blues. But then also, even in terms of music, the blues music, there's a lot of musical references through this piece.
Yeah, before we get started, I just want to say this is one of the most unique pieces I've ever read in my life, short story or book or anything, because a lot of times when I've read a book, you give characters voices. Sometimes you maybe imagine some background noises when they write that in there. Sometimes you might imagine music after you've seen a movie where you think of this story and this theme song pops in your head. For this story, I feel like I was just kind of tapping my foot and I was creating these own musical melodies in my head without any prior knowledge whatsoever. And it just made me get so immersed in this. And I think that Baldwin I can't even put it into words what he's done with this story to immerse me into something so incredible. And no pun intended on the blues. Like, I felt like I was back in the 1920s at a jazz club while I was reading this story. It was just absolutely phenomenal. I can't describe it. It was just so fun to read this.
And I believe, if I may, I don't think you have any musical background. Is that correct?
Music is my least talented area of art or study or anything.
Now, I do have the musical background where I have played, music in bands for well over a decade. I've played in jazz bars. I have played in blues bars. And I also had that experience of just really being immersed into the story where Baldwin I don't know how he did it. James Baldwin pulled off something I've never seen or experienced in literature before. And we have tons of themes to go with that too, in terms of the dread, the trauma, the suffering, finding oneself validation. There was so many parts in this, particularly when he talks about taking this human emotion of suffering and turning that into this musical creation that I was wanting to throw like my book just in excitement. Like I just couldn't explain the feelings. I'm just like, yes, James Baldwin, yes, I know exactly how that feels.
My job is to make college easier because students have a lot on their plate.
And it's incredible the way that he's tied that too into these characters' lives and woven it so seamlessly.
When people get excited about music and they say it brings out their passion and feelings, that's how you and I feel about literature. And now, through this literature story, I can appreciate more how musicians and people that are obsessed with music feel now about music. And I only hope that somebody that is that passionate about music and hates literature could read this and it do the same for them for reading and books and short stories. That's how incredible this story was. I know we're like giving away already our feelings on this before we even got into themes or the plot or anything, but wow, what else can we say about this story? But let's get into it.
Let's do a quick plot recap so that we're all on the same page, and then let's move into some analysis and discussion, right? So narrator's name, couldn't tell you. We don't know, right? Story opens up with a really conservative narrator reading this newspaper about this heroin bust. Shocker, his brother, Sonny, has been arrested. Okay. Narrator tries to go about his day as an algebra teacher. Ooh, that's the one negative part of the story, right?
Okay. Can't be perfect then, right?
Right. Now, if this were a history teacher, okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's change that one little fix there, Mr. Baldwin. One little fix.
But he is a high school teacher in Harlem and immediately starts thinking about these children and Sonny's past, basically. And that's gonna be a theme that we're gonna bring up again, right? He compares Sonny to them. And on his way home, he runs into one of Sonny's old friends that kind of got him hooked on drugs and knows the heroin game, and they kind of talk and I guess listen is questionable, but they talk. And we time skip around where basically, the narrator never calls Sonny. But we time skip around a little bit here in this middle part of the story where we talk about the war, going off to war. There's flashbacks to them as children, all kind of, bringing out more about their personalities and their relationship. Fast forward to a day when, unfortunately, the narrator's daughter dies of polio, and her name's Grace. And it's at this time he finally decides to reach out to Sonny, and Sonny is so excited to finally hear from his brother. And they move in together, and he starts playing the piano, driving everybody nuts, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how tragedy always seems to bring us together when people are at their lowest, blues, sad?
It does. And like I said, there is time skip around here in terms of, how they all feel about things. But it leads to basically Sonny inviting the narrator to Greenwich Village to listen to him play. The narrator comes, sits down, realizes that his brother's the man with all the people in the bar, and that's a real thing. When you're a musician, you kind of have to be the guy's guy, and it's a networking game, and which is part of why this was just so real to me. And then he hears his brother play, and it's this epiphany about how his brother could finally turn suffering and pain and not being heard or validated through his life and turn it into this music that was, throughout the whole story, it's a long shot, right? The narrator's trying to steer him away. He wants a solid job. The musician's kind of the one in a million. Why would you do that? And the narrator finally kind of has this epiphany as he grabs the cup of trembling, we'll get into. And yeah, I feel like that's a good stopping point for the plot, right?
Well, where to start, man? There's so much to digest here. Again, if you can do this in one video tonight, you are incredible.
We won't. We'll just talk about a couple
Okay,
of
we
things,
won't.
right? So,
Okay.
First we just got to talk about the easy stuff, which is James Baldwin's word choice is the most precise I've ever seen an author, where his usage of the word suffering, of darkness and light, he kind of contrasts darkness and light a lot. The ice in the stomach and the fire in your belly that you feel when you're playing. There's a lot of juxtaposition that he's creating through this piece is one thing that, you probably want to pay attention to as you're going through this.
And those words are important because that's what's going to pull out the emotion and allow you to enjoy this story that much more, I feel like.
Well, and then you kind of start to realize that the narrator and Sonny are opposites too. Right?
Yeah,
definitely. One's a romantic going for that, this feels good to play, so I'm going for that. And one's the realist or the conservative.
Yeah, practical. Yeah, the narrator is always by the book.
Yep. One escapes life through running away and hard work. One escapes life and suffering through drugs and music, in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you literally look at their jobs, one's a math teacher and one is a musician. And that doesn't get much more opposite than right. Like their parents would be sitting down and going, why can't you be more like your brother? He's a good teacher and you're a musician.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's a real thing. There are parents that are like, you can't go into art. I know you love it, but you got to go do, the hard.
That's not
science.
A real job.
Right. You get that pressure put on you. And you see that between these two brothers of, you need to become something. And his something is that 1 in a million shot musician. And whether he makes it or not, it doesn't matter. He finally gets his validation through that music, which is what the narrator doesn't hear through this whole thing. And I think that brings me to kind of one of the main points I wanted to talk about is hearing. Do you know what call and response is in music?
See, again, I admitted already that I'm really ignorant when it comes to music stuff. So I kind of have an idea. It's like talking in music or something, right? It's like where the musicians talk with their instruments.
Kind of. It has actually its roots in African music. And it's become this thing where two, I'm going to say, instruments talk. The reason I don't say people is like particularly when it comes to classical music, it could be the woodwinds and the brass section are having a conversation. But one instrument or instruments will issue a phrase like da 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 da, and it pauses at a part that's not resolved, right? Like, well, not always, but that's a common way to describe it, where it feels incomplete. And then the other section will be like da 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 da, like it'll resolve that question. So it's a question and a response, call and response.
So it's almost like a battle, right, between the two things where like they're pushing and pulling against each other. Like you could see the violins lean in and then the horns and like raise up and like push back, like if they were all sitting in the orchestra. Is that kind of what I'm envisioning, right?
Well, arguably, if you've seen Fantasia by Disney or Charles Ives' The Unanswered Question, I'll put a link down below.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
You can see they're creating a story, and the way they're talking can be argumentative. It could be love and playful. It's as diverse as human emotion is, and music is another way of expressing that, which is really, the skill of what musicians have. But what's interesting is how, this whole piece is very musical, right? But even the characters are doing this call and response thing. And one of the keys to call and response, if you listen to a band like the Dave Holland Quintet, the two Robin Eubanks and Chris Potter are like, it's a trombone player and a saxophonist, I believe it is. They're basically weaving around each other through all of their songs, through their pieces. It's incredible. Definitely go check it out. But it only works if you're both listening. If you're, people talk about, it sounds like jazz is four people playing different songs at the same time, which is funny.
Yeah, right.
But
it's a lot to interpret.
But it doesn't actually hold true. Like you do have, these two players that are playing with a motif or a theme and weaving around each other. Now compare that with these two characters in terms of the narrator and Sonny. They aren't listening to each other. And to the point earlier about James Baldwin's precise wordplay, when he comes across the heroine friend, we have, I'll walk you a little ways, he said. We started walking. There were a couple of kids still loitering in the courtyard. dot dot dot, and looked strangely at the boy beside me. So you'll notice throughout this whole piece, he's going to use words like looked, okay? He's not going to ever say heard, but it's always these visual things. And he's also going to keep coming back to the younger kids, right? As soon as he found out about the heroin bust, he focuses on the kids because that's all going back to them as little kids, which is probably the last time that he's really listened or heard his brother, is one of the ways I would interpret it. But we have things like, so for example, when he's talking to this guy, he says, look, don't tell me your sad story. So at first he's saying, look, right? Again, not an audio thing. And then he's saying, don't tell me your story. I don't want to listen. And that's kind of what this narrator is going through this whole piece of. He's unable to play the call and response game with his brother that he hasn't really listened to since they were kids. And it just goes on and on. Like when we see the barmaid, he instantly thinks of a little girl. When Sonny writes back after, the narrator finally contacts him after his daughter dies, again, there's that little, younger child symbology there again. He says, it was great to hear from you, right? Not to, for you to reach out or to, to talk to you. And the narrator has never heard of Sonny Parker when he's telling him about his favorite musician. So all of these very precise words leading back to the childhood moment of when they were last connected and how they haven't been hearing. The call and response of music is very relevant to the call and response of human beings and how we want to connect and interact with each other. And that's what these two brothers are missing out on.
And at the end, when he finally does connect, he's listening to his music. Oh, mind blown, man. Baldwin, man. Oof. So good. So good.
Well, and
I just got goosebumps.
And I've even heard that Baldwin is very religious. I don't know enough about Baldwin. I need to get more into him. We're going to get more into him. But I couldn't help but notice that when his daughter passed away, her name was Grace.
I think that ties in a little bit to Baldwin being a pastor, and he's pulling a little bit from his religious background of this is a time of rebuilding and restoring this relationship between these two brothers.
Well, and then have you heard any theories about the book of Isaiah with this story?
Yeah, so when reading it and researching it, I did see a little bit of that. I peeked and cheated a little.
Well, I don't think people have gone far enough, but the other people would say we go too deep. So, whatever side of the fence you want to be on with that.
6 one, half dozen another, right?
Right.
We're never right. We're never wrong.
So Crypto, I know you've got a background in religious studies and stuff. So let's go a little bit deeper into the book of Isaiah here with me, okay?
Let's do it.
The whole point, well, I don't want to say the whole point. A major point of that story is the idea of out with the old, in with the new, right? We constantly see these references to old Jerusalem being burned down, purified, and being rebuilt and renewed with the new Jerusalem as kind of the warnings that the prophet Isaiah is delivering in this section of the Bible, right?
I think Sonny is a great example of this, is that he's kind of stuck in these old ways and he needs to grow. He needs to, burn away the old ways of, drug use and move forward, have a new, lifestyle.
Well, flirtatious and frivolous Lydia Bennett was gone.
Well, and I think he's even compared to Harlem, the people of Harlem, right? We have quotes like, I told myself that Sonny was wild, but he wasn't crazy. And he'd always been a good boy. He hadn't ever turned hard or evil or disrespectful the way kids can so quick, especially in Harlem. So in the book of Isaiah, the people were being tempted by these, false prophets, praying to these alternate gods. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here is where are you going to put your faith? People of Harlem, how are we going to move forward is maybe one of the conversations that I think Baldwin is starting with the story.
So if we kind of tie that back to the book of Isaiah, the people weren't listening in the book of Isaiah, just like the narrator isn't listening to Sonny in this story.
Yeah.
So if you look at Sonny and his old way of life, very destructive. If you look at the people before the transition, very destructive as well. So it's this time of regrowth and training, or it's a time of regrowth and renewal.
And then kind of halfway through the book, you have the people were exiled. And what happens to Sonny in the story, he's kind of exiled. Right? He goes away to prison for many, many years. We don't hear from him. We don't reach out for him until he finally comes back, just like in the Bible.
Yeah, and then you kind of tie that back to when he does come back, he does have this new sense of purpose and renewal, and I think that's where that Baldwin ties it beautifully to music and specifically blues, jazz, and bebop.
It's turning suffering into something creative. And we have the quote from the book that talks about the cup of trembling, which is the direct quote from the Bible, which is how many people have gone down this path of comparing it to this book.
And I think Baldwin really takes this and makes it his own. He takes his kind of sermon, religious background, and in the story has a beautiful quote that says, "For why the tale of how we suffer and how we are delighted and how we may triumph is never new. It always must be heard. There isn't any other tale to tell. It is the only light we have gotten in all this darkness."
Okay. So I hope you've been enlightened and entertained and all of the above things in our discussion today. Is there anyone here that has any questions that they would like to ask at this point before we end? You know, it's a lot to take in, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to provide all of the links for the videos that we watched today in the discussion board here shortly, or not in the discussion board, in the announcements here shortly, in case you want to go back and review any of that stuff for when you're writing, or if you want to use any of those quotes that they provided for you. Remember again that you may not agree with the videos. That is okay, as long as you can support your thoughts based on the short story that you choose. And you don't have to choose either of those two short stories that I showed you videos for either. There are the other two short stories that are out there, and there are videos available for those as well. So with that, I'm going to end our time today. And you guys have a really great week, and I'll see you next week.